The smell of exhaustion was a permanent resident in my life. It clung to my scrubs like the scent of antiseptic, a cloying perfume of double shifts and lukewarm coffee. It lived in the cramped, two-bedroom apartment where the floorboards groaned under the weight of my mother's medical debt and my own dwindling hope. Tonight, it was particularly potent, a metallic tang of blood and fear that saturated the air in the emergency room. A 10-car pileup on the interstate had turned our usually chaotic Saturday night into a symphony of suffering, and I was just one of its beleaguered conductors. My muscles screamed a dull, aching protest against the 16th consecutive hour on my feet. All I wanted was my lumpy mattress and 3 hours of dreamless sleep before I had to do it all over again. That was when he was wheeled in, a discordant note in the ER's frantic melody. He wasn't from the pileup. His injury was singular, a dark, weeping blossom of crimson on the fine wool of his tailored suit jacket. A gunshot wound. He was surrounded by 2 other men, their own suits immaculate, their faces carved from stone. They moved with a predatory grace that didn't belong among the gurneys and 4 drips, their presence sucking the air from the already suffocating space. I saw Nurse Jenkins, a woman who'd seen 3 decades of trauma, take an involuntary step back. But I didn't have the luxury of fear. I had a protocol. I stepped forward, my voice clipped with the authority I had to fake. I need you to step aside. Now. What's his name? Allergies? The men ignored me, their focus entirely on the man bleeding on my gurney. They began speaking in rapid, hushed Spanish, their words a frantic buzz of concern and command. One of them, the older one with silver at his temples, tried to touch the wound. My own exhaustion and frustration boiled over. Without thinking, I snapped my own Spanish, learned in the loud, vibrant neighborhood of my childhood, coming out sharp and fluent. No toques nada. Quitens mi camino o lo de yo sangre aquí mismo. Necesito espacio para trabajar, don't touch anything. Get out of my way, or I'll let him bleed out right here. I need room to work. Silence fell. Not just from the 2 men, who stared at me with wide, shocked eyes, but from the man on the gurney. I had assumed he was unconscious, or close to it. But his eyes were open, and they were fixed on me. They were the palest, most unsettling shade of gray I had ever seen, like a winter storm trapped behind his lashes. In that moment, as I met his gaze, the entire emergency room, with its beeping monitors and desperate cries, faded into a dull, distant hum. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched me, a flicker of something unreadable, surprise, calculation, possession, passing through that icy stare. Then his hand, surprisingly strong, shot out and clamped around my wrist. The contact was a jolt, a spark of heat against my cold, tired skin. His thumb brushed over my pulse point, a slow, deliberate gesture. His gaze dropped to my name badge, then lifted back to my face. He held me there for a long beat, his grip a manacle of silent assessment, before his eyes fluttered shut and his head fell back against the pillow. The 2 men finally backed away, giving me the space I'd demanded. My wrist throbbed where he'd held it, the ghost of his touch a brand I could still feel as I began to work, my professionalism a fragile shield against the storm I had just unwittingly entered. 3 days passed. The city swallowed the memory of that night, as it always did. The chaos of the ER continued, a relentless tide of human misery and resilience. I paid my rent, 2 days late, the landlord sigh a familiar sound over the phone. I called my mother, lying about how well I was doing, her frail voice a constant reminder of why I pushed myself past every breaking point. The man with the storm-gray eyes was a ghost, a strange, intense memory that surfaced in the quiet moments before sleep. I'd heard he'd checked out against medical advice less than 12 hours after I'd stabilized him. No name, no insurance, just an obscene amount of cash left on the counter at the billing department. He was gone, a footnote in a long chapter of exhausting nights. Or so I thought. I was walking to my car after another grueling shift, the pre-dawn air cold and damp against my cheeks. The hospital parking lot was a concrete desert, sparsely populated with the cars of the night shift damned. A sleek black sedan, so dark it seemed to absorb the dim light, was parked beside my beat-up hatchback. It hadn't been there when I arrived. As I fumbled for my keys, a figure detached himself from the shadows beside the car. It was the older man from the ER, the one with the silver-streaked hair. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clutched my keys, the metal biting into my palm. "I don't have any money," I said, my voice thin. He offered a small, disarming smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We are not here to rob you," Alani. Hearing him say my name sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. He knew my name. Of course, he did. The man on the gurney had read my badge. "My name is Marcus. My employer was very impressed with your professionalism the other night. He requires your services again." I shook my head, taking a step back. "I'm a hospital nurse. I don't make house calls. This would be a private consultation," Marcus said smoothly. His tone was polite, but the air around us crackled with something else entirely. It was the calm before a strike. "You would be compensated beyond what this hospital could pay you in a decade. Enough to ensure your mother receives the best care at the Crestwood facility. I believe her neurologist there is Dr. Albright." A very fine man. The world tilted. He knew about my mother. He knew her doctor. This wasn't a request. It was a summons, wrapped in the silken ribbon of a threat. My entire life, my most vulnerable point, laid bare in a dark parking lot. The illusion of my small, anonymous existence shattered into a million pieces. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a cold, heavy resignation. There was no choice here. There never had been from the moment he'd grabbed my wrist. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The ride was silent and unnervingly smooth. I sat in the back of the sedan, its leather seats smelling of wealth and power, watching my gritty, familiar world slip by outside the tinted windows. We left the city behind, climbing into the hills where the houses were hidden behind formidable gates and ancient trees. We drove through one such gate, a massive iron affair that opened without a sound, and up a long, winding driveway. The house that emerged from the pre-dawn mist wasn't just a house. It was a fortress of glass and dark stone, perched on the edge of the cliffside, overlooking the glittering expanse of the city below. It was beautiful, austere, and as intimidating as the man who owned it. Marcus led me inside. The interior was a study in controlled luxury. Polished concrete floors, vast expanses of glass, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than my car. It was opulent but cold, a gilded cage. He led me up a floating staircase to a large bedroom. And there he was. Kian. He was propped up against a mountain of pillows on a bed large enough to be a territory in its own right. He was shirtless, and a fresh, stark white dressing was taped to his side. Even weakened, feverish, he dominated the room. His gray eyes found mine the moment I stepped through the door. "The stitches are infected," he said, his voice a low rasp. There was no greeting, no preamble. "My doctor is unavailable." "You will fix it." The professional in me took over, a welcome anesthetic for my fear. I approached the bed, my gaze clinical as I assessed the angry red inflammation around the dressing. His skin was hot to the touch, a dry, radiating heat. "You should be in a hospital. This needs a heavy course of intravenous antibiotics. The hospital is not an option," he stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. Marcus placed a fully stocked, professional-grade medical bag on a nearby table. It had everything I would need and more. They had planned this. They had known. For the next few days, that room became my world. I fell into a routine dictated by his fever, by the slow, arduous process of fighting the infection. I cleaned the wound, administered the powerful antibiotics they had somehow procured, monitored his vitals, and forced broth and water past his lips. We barely spoke. The silence was a living thing between us, filled with the rustle of sheets, the clink of medical instruments, the sound of his labored breathing. In this space, the power dynamic shifted. He was no longer the terrifying, untouchable figure from the ER. He was my patient. He was vulnerable, reliant on my hands, my knowledge. I saw the lines of pain etched around his mouth, the sheen of sweat on his brow. I saw the tremor in his hand when he reached for a glass of water. And in these moments of forced intimacy, something shifted in me too. Fear began to coexist with a strange, unwilling flicker of compassion. One night, his fever spiked. He was delirious, muttering in a language I didn't know, his body thrashing against the cool sheets. I worked tirelessly, placing cold compresses on his forehead, murmuring soothing nonsense as I would to any scared patient. At one point, he grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly tight. His eyes, clouded with fever, focused on me. "Elena," he whispered, the name a raw, broken thing. Then his eyes cleared for a moment, the storm within them recognizing me. He didn't let go of my hand. He just held it, his thumb stroking the back of my knuckles, until he finally fell into a deep, healing sleep. I sat there for hours, my hand trapped in his, my heart a confused, frantic bird in my chest. Who was Elena? And why did the sound of her name on his lips feel like a wound? The fever broke the next morning. The change was palpable. The oppressive heat in the room receded, and the tension in his body eased. When he woke, his eyes were clear, the icy gray sharp and intelligent once more. He looked at our joined hands, then released me as if he'd been burned. He sat up, the movement still stiff with pain, and looked out the vast window at the city below. "You should know the situation you are in," he said, his voice stronger now. He didn't look at me. "The man who shot me is named Valerius. He believes I have something that belongs to him. He is not a man who forgives or forgets. By treating me, by being here, you have become a loose end. A liability." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you talking about?" "I'm a nurse. I just did my job in my world," he said, finally turning to look at me, his gaze pinning me in place. "There is no such thing as just a job. Everything is a choice, a move on the board. You chose to speak Spanish. You chose to be competent. You made yourself memorable." He paused, and his next words were delivered with a chilling precision. "I don't allow variables in my life, Alani. So I learned everything about you. Your nursing degree from City College, magna cum laude. The $67,000 in student loan debt. Your mother, Maria, and her stage 2 multiple sclerosis. Your ex-boyfriend, David, who added $12,000 of credit card debt to your name before he disappeared. I know you. Violation was a physical sickness that rose in my throat. He had dissected my life, picked apart my struggles and my sorrows, and laid them out like specimens under a microscope. But beneath the violation was a sliver of something else. A strange, terrifying sense of being seen. No one had ever looked at my life with such intensity, such focus. He hadn't just seen the tired nurse. He'd seen the years of struggle that had forged me. "Why?" I whispered. "Why tell me all this?" "Because Valerius is looking for a way to get to me," he said, his voice dropping. "And he will find you. He will see you as a weakness. A lever. And I have a plan to use that perception against him." The plan was simple, and it was horrifying. I was to be the bait. Kian explained it with the detached calm of a general planning a battle. Valerius's people had been watching the hospital, my apartment. They knew I was gone. They would be looking for me. I was to go to a small cafe downtown, a place I used to frequent, and sit alone. I was to look scared, vulnerable. I was to be the perfect target. "You will be protected," Kian assured me, seeing the terror in my eyes. "My men will be everywhere. Nothing will happen to you. But I need them to make a move. I need them to show their hand in the open, to actively walk into danger when against every instinct I had." But what choice did I have? To refuse was to remain a target, a hunted animal waiting for the inevitable. To agree was to place my life entirely in the hands of this ruthless, compelling man. I looked at him, at the raw determination in his eyes, and saw not a monster, but a survivor, forged in a world I couldn't imagine. And I realized, with a startling certainty, that I felt safer in his dangerous orbit than I ever had in my life of quiet desperation. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll do it." The cafe was exactly as I remembered it, the smell of burnt coffee and sugar, the low murmur of conversations, the worn velvet on the chairs. But today, it all felt different, like a stage set for a play in which I was the unwilling star. I sat at a small table by the window, a cup of untouched tea cooling in front of me. I tried to read a book, but the words swam before my eyes. Every person who walked through the door sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I could feel unseen eyes on me, Kian's men, a ghost army guarding me from the shadows. I had never felt so alone and so watched at the same time. After 20 minutes that stretched into an eternity, two men entered. They didn't belong. They were too big, their clothes too slick, their eyes scanning the room with a cold professionalism that had nothing to do with ordering a latte. They spotted me. They started walking toward my table. My breath hitched. My hands grew clammy. This was it. They were 2 feet from my table when the world seemed to shift. The man who had been reading a newspaper in the corner stood up, and he was no longer a mild-mannered academic, but a wall of muscle. The couple whispering in the booth behind me separated, moving to block the exit. Marcus appeared from the kitchen, a napkin still in his hand, his pleasant demeanor gone, replaced by a deadly focus. The two men froze, realizing their mistake too late. The confrontation was brutally, almost silently efficient. There was no shouting, no gunfire. Just a few swift, decisive movements, and Valerius's men were neutralized, bundled out a back entrance before most of the cafe patrons even noticed a disturbance. Marcus walked over to my table. "It is done," he said softly. "You can go now." He meant I was free to go back to the mansion. Back to Kian. When I returned, he was waiting for me in his study, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. A small, fresh cut adorned his cheekbone, a testament to his own involvement in the night's events. The external threat was gone. Valerius had been dealt with. The air in the room was still, charged with the aftermath of violence and the precipice of a decision. He gestured to a leather briefcase on the massive oak desk. He opened it. It was filled with neat stacks of $100 bills. More money than I had ever seen in my life. "This is yours," he said, his voice even. "It's enough to pay for your mother's care for the rest of her life. Enough for you to go anywhere, start over. You can walk out that door, and you will never see me or this life again. You will be safe. I will make sure of it." He was offering me an escape. He was offering me back my old life, but without the desperation, without the fear of bills and eviction notices. It was everything I had ever wanted. I stood there, looking from the money to his face. I thought of my cramped apartment, the smell of antiseptic, the bone-deep weariness that had been my constant companion. That life was safe, predictable. It was also gray, a slow-motion drowning. Then I thought of the last week. The terror, the adrenaline, the strange, fierce sense of purpose. I thought of his hand in mine in the middle of a fevered night, the way his eyes had followed me as I worked, the chilling intimacy of him knowing my every secret. This world was violent and terrifying, but in it, I had felt more alive than I had in years. Slowly, deliberately, I reached out and closed the lid of the briefcase. I pushed it back across the desk toward him. His stormy eyes widened slightly, the only sign of his surprise. "My mother's care will be taken care of," I said, my voice clear and strong. "But I am not leaving." I walked around the desk until I was standing in front of him. I picked up a cloth from a nearby tray, dampened it with a bit of water from a carafe, and gently, carefully, began to clean the fresh cut on his cheek. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. He simply watched me, his gaze intense, searching. In that moment, surrounded by the trappings of his dangerous empire, my hand on his face, I wasn't a victim or a pawn. I was making a choice. I was choosing the storm over the quiet misery of the shore. And for the first time in a very long time, it felt like I was finally coming home.